Welcome to Cocotale's Reddit, where we pour a glass of wine and spill the tea on the stories that are almost too wild to be true. You know those moments in life that feel like they're straight out of a movie? The ones that make you pause and wonder how you even got there. We've all had those little heartbreaks and betrayals. But sometimes, a story comes along that takes it to a whole other level. Tonight, we're diving into one of those. It's a story about family, money, and the kind of deception that can curdle your blood. Imagine dedicating your entire life to building something, only to realize the people you trust most are plotting to burn it all down with you inside. The restaurant was called Oriole, and the air inside felt like it was woven from money and secrets. It was all dark, polished mahogany and lighting so soft it felt like a dream, a place where whispers were more powerful than shouts. The gentle clinking of glasses and the low hum of conversation from other tables felt a million miles away from the noise at ours. We were a spectacle, a loud, glittering island in a sea of quiet elegance. My father, Robert Reynolds, was holding court, his voice booming with that signature confidence that sucked all the oxygen out of a room. "To the Reynolds family!" he toasted, raising a glass of champagne that I knew cost more than my first car. "And to my son, Daniel, for landing the biggest contract in this company's history." The table erupted in a chorus of what I can only describe as manufactured joy. My mother, Margaret, beamed at my younger brother, her eyes sparkling with a kind of pride she never, not once, aimed in my direction. Daniel, ever the showman, gave a little mock bow, basking in the applause like it was sunshine. His wife, Jessica, giggled and squeezed his arm, looking at him like he'd single-handedly built the moon. Our family friend and business partner, Thomas Green, his wife, and two other board members all raised their glasses high. I raised mine, too. A weak, tired smile was plastered on my face, but it felt as heavy as a lead mask. For 12 years, since walking straight out of college with an engineering degree and into our small family construction business, I had been the one on the ground. I was the one whose eyes burned from staring at blueprints all night, the one managing crews in the blistering summer heat, the one who spent sleepless nights making sure every single foundation was solid. It was my work, my designs, that had transformed Reynolds Construction from a local outfit into a regional powerhouse. The very government contract they were celebrating Daniel for? It was built on a proposal I had spent 6 agonizing months perfecting. I was the engine of the company, but Daniel was the shiny new hood ornament. Just as the celebration hit its peak, the waiter, a young man with nervous eyes that kept darting towards our boisterous table, placed a small, leather-bound folder in the center. The bill. My father glanced at it, and then let out a loud, performative laugh. "Oh, brother!" he boomed, slapping his pockets with theatrical flair. "Would you look at that? I seem to have forgotten my wallet." My mother, a master of amateur dramatics, played her part perfectly. Her hand flew to her mouth in mock surprise. "Oh dear, so have I. All my cards are in my other purse." It was a well-rehearsed, disgusting little play. Then, Daniel just winked at me from across the table. It was the same wink he'd given me since we were kids playing in the backyard. It was the wink that always meant, "I got away with it, and you're going to take the fall for me." It was a wink of pure, unadulterated entitlement. A wink that said I was not his brother, but his tool. The laughter around the table was genuine this time. They all looked at me. The reliable son, the fixer, the family ATM. The expectation was crystal clear. I was to handle it just like I always did. The bill was $28,000. The waiter stood there, his professional smile faltering as the air grew thick and heavy. I looked at the bill, then I looked at their smug, expectant faces. My father's condescending grin, my mother's pitying gaze, my brother's triumphant smirk. That wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was knowing they had already stolen millions from me and were actively plotting to destroy my life's work. Slowly, deliberately, I reached into my jacket pocket. Every eye was on me. but I didn't pull out a wallet. I placed a small, black USB drive on the polished mahogany table. In the sudden, deafening silence, it made a soft, definitive. I looked down at the small black rectangle on the table, a tiny piece of plastic that held the power to shatter their entire world. The laughter had died instantly, replaced by a thick, suffocating silence. My father's face, which had been so full of smug satisfaction just a moment ago, was now a mask of confusion and rising anger. To understand how we got there, how a family dinner could turn into a hostage negotiation where I was the one with all the leverage, you have to go back a few weeks. You have to go back to the quiet hum of my office late at night, a place that felt more like home to me than my own apartment. The only light came from my monitor as I triple-checked the load-bearing calculations for the I-87 bridge expansion project. That project was my baby. It wasn't just concrete and steel, it was the culmination of everything I'd ever worked for, a complex and elegant design that I was immensely proud of. Reynolds Construction wasn't just a job for me, it was my entire identity. While my father had founded the company, I was the one who had truly built it, brick by brick, blueprint by blueprint. I loved the smell of sawdust and wet concrete, the challenge of turning a drawing into something real and tangible, something that would stand for 100 years. I had poured my entire youth into that company, working weekends, skipping vacations, all under the belief that I was building a future for all of us. That night, Daniel had swung by my office, his expensive cologne announcing his arrival long before he did. "Burning the midnight oil again, big brother?" he'd said, flashing that perfect, easy smile. He was always better with people than he was with plans. He was the charismatic face of the company, while I was its beating heart, its engine. He'd left his phone on my desk while he went to grab coffee with some junior exec he was trying to impress. And that's when it buzzed. Just once. My eyes glanced down. A message had appeared on the lock screen. It was from his wife, Jessica. "He doesn't suspect a thing. Dad says we're good to move forward after the contract signing." A chill, cold and sharp as a shard of ice, snaked its way up my spine. My hand, which had been hovering over my mouse, froze mid-air. He doesn't suspect a thing. Who was he? My mind raced, but it could only land on one person. It had to be me. And what were they moving forward with? My first instinct was to rationalize, to push it away. It was probably nothing. Just silly family chatter, a surprise party, a vacation plan, but the wording, it felt wrong. It felt conspiratorial. The message didn't fade. It just sat there on the glowing screen. A quiet indictment. In that single moment, a seed of doubt was planted. A tiny, poisonous seed dropped into the foundation of trust that I believed my entire family was built upon. I had spent my life making sure foundations were solid, but I never thought to check my own. For the rest of the night, I couldn't focus. The numbers and calculations on the screen blurred together. The bridge, my beautiful, elegant design, suddenly felt fragile, vulnerable. All I could see were those words, looping in my head. He doesn't suspect a thing. The casual cruelty of it, the assumption of my ignorance, was like a quiet poison seeping into my veins. The trust I had given so freely, so completely, for 35 years suddenly felt like the most naive, foolish mistake of my life. After that night, it was like a filter had been lifted from my eyes. Everything I saw was colored by that one toxic sentence. It was probably nothing, I'd tell myself, just family chatter. But the doubt, once planted, began to sprout, its ugly little tendrils wrapping around everything. I started noticing things, small signs I had previously dismissed as just part of our family dynamic. The way my father and Daniel would abruptly stop talking the moment I walked into a room, their conversation dissolving into meaningless pleasantries. The way my mother would quickly close her laptop screen if I came up behind her, her expression just a little too neutral. I'd always felt a bit on the outside, the serious, boring son compared to the charming, outgoing one. But this felt different. This felt like I was being managed, handled, kept in the dark for a reason. The final, undeniable confirmation came at our weekly Sunday dinner a few days later. We were all gathered around the big oak table at my parents' house, the same table where I'd done my homework as a kid while my dad worked on his ledgers. The air was thick with the smell of my mother's roast chicken, a scent that used to mean comfort and home, but now just felt like a layer of deception. "We're so proud of you, Danny," my mother gushed, passing him the roast potatoes. "Securing this government deal, it's just brilliant. Your father always said you had the magic touch." "He's a natural leader," my father added, beaming with a pride that physically hurt to watch. "He knows how to close. That's what matters in this business." I just sat there, chewing my food, which suddenly tasted like ash. I had been the one who led the technical presentation. I had answered every single complex question from the State Procurement Committee. I had spent weeks refining the engineering specs that made our bid superior to everyone else's. Daniel had shaken their hands and taken them to a steak dinner. As if reading my thoughts, my father gave me a dismissive wave. "Ethan's technical work was solid, of course," he said, almost as an afterthought. "Good support. Every team needs its grunts." Grunts. The word hit me like a physical blow. It echoed in the dining room, stripping away 12 years of my life's work and reducing it to manual labor. I looked up and saw Daniel catch my eye. He gave me that wink again. My stomach tightened into a cold, hard knot. It wasn't just about credit anymore. The text message, the hushed conversations, and now the casual, brutal dismissal of my entire contribution, it was all starting to connect into a terrifying pattern I could no longer ignore. The next morning, the doubt had solidified into a decision. I wasn't going to be the good, quiet son anymore. I was going to find out the truth. My first stop was a small, unassuming office downtown with a simple sign on the door: Martinez Investigations. Victor Martinez was a former fraud detective with a reputation for being discreet and utterly relentless. He was a stocky man in his mid-40s with tired eyes that seemed to miss absolutely nothing. "Family business is messy," he said, after I carefully laid out my suspicions, framing them as just that, suspicions. I wasn't ready to believe the worst yet. "I just need to know if the company's finances are in order," I told him, writing a check from my personal savings. "And if the ownership structure is what I've always been told it is." While Victor began his work, I made a call I hadn't made in years. It was awkward, the space of our breakup still hanging between us, but I needed to hear a voice I knew wouldn't lie to me. "Sarah." "Ethan Reynolds," she said, her voice professional but with a hint of warmth I remembered so well. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "I need some industry insight, Sarah. Off the record," I said, my voice low. I asked her about Reynolds Construction's reputation, about the whispers she might have heard regarding the big government contract. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Look, Ethan, just be careful," she said finally, her tone shifting to one of genuine concern. "There are rumors, whispers that your company has gotten a little too cozy with Senator James Wilson. He chairs the Infrastructure Committee. People are saying your bids get a little too much special consideration." My blood ran cold. My father had built his entire persona on integrity and winning on merit. The idea that he'd be involved with a notoriously corrupt politician like Wilson, it was unthinkable. But as the words settled in, another piece of the ugly puzzle clicked into place. The warning from Sarah about Senator Wilson hung in the air long after our call ended. It was one thing to suspect my family of cutting me out, of being greedy and selfish. It was another thing entirely to imagine them entangled in actual federal corruption. The seed of doubt was no longer just a seed. It was a rapidly growing vine, choking out the last of my denial. A few days later, Rebecca Chin, a junior accountant, knocked softly on my office door. She was young, incredibly bright, and one of the few people in the company who always treated me with genuine respect, not as the boss's son, but as the engineer who knew the business inside and out. She clutched a file folder to her chest so tightly her knuckles were white. "Mr. Reynolds." "Ethan," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't want to cause any trouble, but I found something. It's probably nothing, but it felt unusual." She slid the folder across my desk. Inside was a wire transfer confirmation for $50,000 to a consulting firm I'd never heard of, coded under miscellaneous operating expenses. I was reconciling the quarterly accounts, she explained, her eyes wide with concern. There have been a few of these, always to different LLCs, and always approved directly by your mother. My blood turned to ice. What did she say when you asked about it? I asked, keeping my voice steady. Rebecca looked down, embarrassed. She told me not to worry my pretty little head about it and to just process it. The familiar condescension in my mother's tone, even secondhand, made my stomach churn. This wasn't just a simple transfer. This was a secret. Thank you, Rebecca, I said, my voice filled with a sincerity that seemed to reassure her. You did the absolute right thing by bringing this to me. Can you keep an eye out for anything else like this? She nodded, a look of relief washing over her face. Of course. I always thought you were the one who really ran this place with integrity. She was my first ally. A small, brave woman who had just confirmed I wasn't going crazy. The company I loved was being bled dry from the inside. The final, gut-wrenching blow came from Victor Martinez. He called me for a meeting at a noisy downtown coffee shop, a place where no one could possibly overhear. He didn't waste time with pleasantries, just slid a thin file across the table. You were right to be suspicious, he said, his voice grim. I started with the articles of incorporation. 3 years ago, during a routine legal update, the ownership structure of the company was changed. He turned the document around for me to see. It was a complete redistribution of shares. My father, Robert, held 30%. My mother, Margaret, 10%. My brother, Daniel, a staggering 40%. And me? I was left with a measly 20%. I stared at the signature on the document, the familiar looping script. It was mine. A memory surfaced, hazy at first, then sharp and sickeningly clear. I was in my father's office, buried in blueprints for a difficult project. He'd pushed a thick stack of papers towards me. Just some tax optimization paperwork from the lawyer's son, he'd said casually. Standard procedure. Just sign here, here, and here. I had been stressed, exhausted, and completely focused on a deadline. I trusted him. I had signed my own birthright away without even reading it. The feeling of my own stupidity was a physical illness, a hot, nauseating wave that washed over me. This was the first twist of the knife, the realization that the betrayal hadn't just started. It had been formalized years ago. I wasn't a partner. I was just a minority shareholder, an employee in the company I had poured my entire soul into building. After that meeting, I walked for hours, the city blurring around me. The anger was a churning, white-hot thing in my gut, but underneath it was a deep, hollow ache. It was the kind of ache that comes from a wound inflicted by the very people who were supposed to protect you, the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally. They hadn't just lied to me. They had used my trust, my love for them, as a weapon against me. That night, I didn't go home. I couldn't. My apartment would have felt like a stranger's house. Instead, I went back to the office, the one place that still felt like mine. I sat in my chair in the dark, the city lights twinkling below like 1,000 distant, unfeeling stars. The fight wasn't just about a title or money anymore. It was about my life. They had taken my work, my trust, and my future, and they had done it with smiles on their faces. I picked up the phone. My thumb hovered over the numbers for my father, my mother, my brother. For a split second, a lifetime of conditioning, of wanting to fix things, washed over me. But it was followed by the cold, hard memory of my signature on that document. They didn't want to fix this. They wanted to erase me. I didn't call them. I called Victor Martinez. Keep digging, I said, my voice as hard as the steel beams I knew how to install. I want to know everything. The good son was gone. In his place was a man with nothing left to lose. A few days later, armed with Victor's initial findings and Rebecca's file, I made an appointment. Olivia Parker was one of the top corporate fraud attorneys in the state, with a reputation for being as brilliant as she was ruthless. Her office was the complete opposite of my family's warm, wood-paneled world. It was stark, modern, all glass and steel, with a panoramic view that overlooked the entire city. It was a place built for war. She listened intently as I laid out the whole sordid story, my voice never wavering once. I spread the documents across her glass desk, the altered ownership papers, the wire transfers, my notes from the call with Sarah. She reviewed them in silence, her expression completely unreadable. She put on a pair of sharp, black-framed reading glasses and examined the forged ownership documents first, holding them up to the light as if she could see the lie in the very fibers of the paper. She scanned the bank statements, her lips a thin, tight line. She read my father's email to Daniel twice, her focus absolute. When she finally looked up, her eyes were as sharp as a hawk's. "They didn't just sideline you, Mr. Reynolds," she said, her voice crisp and devoid of pity. "They committed multiple felonies: forgery, embezzlement, wire fraud, conspiracy to defraud the United States government. The list is long, and it is ugly." Hearing the words spoken so clinically, so definitively, was both terrifying and validating. "What are my options?" I asked, my heart pounding against my ribs. "You have two," she said, leaning forward, her eyes locking onto mine. "Option 1, we sue them civilly. We fight to restore your ownership. We claw back the stolen money. It will be long, public, and incredibly ugly. They will drag your name through the mud. They will call you disgruntled, incompetent. They will use their money and their influence to try and crush you in the press." I felt a knot of dread tighten in my stomach. I could already picture the headlines. My father playing the victim. "And option 2? I asked. A slow, dangerous smile spread across her face. It was the first glimmer of emotion I'd seen from her, and it was terrifying. "Option 2, she said, her voice dropping slightly, "is we let them walk right into the trap they've already set for you. We don't just react. We plan. We gather conclusive, irrefutable evidence of everything. We document every lie, every transfer, every secret meeting. We build a fortress of facts so strong that no lie can ever breach it." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "And then, Mr. Reynolds, we don't just sue them. We burn their whole corrupt world to the ground." I looked out her window at the sprawling city I had helped build. My city, my company, my life. They thought I was weak. They thought my integrity was a flaw. They were about to find out how wrong they were. I turned back to Olivia. "Let's get some gasoline," I said. The war had begun. The month that followed was the longest and most difficult of my life. I was living a complete double existence. By day, I was Ethan Reynolds, the dutiful son and hardworking chief engineer, playing my part in their grand charade. I reviewed blueprints, nodded along in meetings where my ideas were either ignored or blatantly stolen by Daniel right in front of me, and I absorbed my father's condescending praise with a practiced, hollow smile. But by night, I was a man at war. Olivia's strategy was meticulous and unforgiving. "We need evidence that would stand up in both civil and criminal court," she'd instructed during one of our late-night meetings. "That means a clean chain of custody and irrefutable proof. No shortcuts." My office, once my sanctuary of creation, became a listening post. Since our state was a one-party consent state for recordings, I began recording every single conversation I had with my father and brother. Hearing their casual lies, the layers of condescension, the dismissive tone they used when they thought they were placating meal, while knowing it was being documented, was a strange and empowering feeling. It was like I could finally see the truth in high definition. Rebecca, my brave ally in the accounting department, became my secret weapon. She was terrified, but her sense of right and wrong was stronger than her fear. She documented the exact digital breadcrumbs the embezzled funds took, a dizzying path from our company accounts to shell corporations in Panama, and finally to personal accounts in the Cayman Islands. She found the invoices for consulting services from a company owned by Senator Wilson's brother-in-law, the blatant vehicle for the kickbacks. While the mountain of evidence grew, the pressure from my family intensified. As they got closer to the contract signing, their confidence became arrogance. My mother was perhaps the cruelest, treating me with a cloying, pitying affection that was clearly a performance for others. "Oh, Ethan, don't work so hard," she'd say in front of other employees. "You need to get out more. Find a nice girl. Daniel is so lucky to have Jessica to help him unwind." It was a deliberate campaign to paint me as the lonely, socially awkward workhorse, while Daniel was the well-rounded, charming successor. The most difficult part was facing Thomas Green, the man I'd called Uncle Thomas my whole life. He'd pull me aside, putting a fatherly arm around my shoulder. "Your dad is tough on you, I know," he'd say, his voice full of false sympathy. "But you're the bedrock of this company, son." Never forget that. Hearing those words from him, knowing he was a key player in the plot to destroy me, took every ounce of self-control I possessed. One Saturday, my mother insisted on a family barbecue. It was a perfect, sunny afternoon that felt like a beautiful lie. I made a point of positioning myself near the patio where Jessica was holding court with her friends, a large glass of white wine in her hand. Pretending to be on a phone call, I paced nearby, the recorder in my pocket running. "We're so excited," Jessica slurred slightly, her voice loud and careless. "Once this big deal is finalized next month, we're finally buying the house in the Caymans. Daniel has had his eye on it for ages. Private beach and everything." A cold knot formed in my stomach. The house in the Cayman Islands. The final destination for the money they had stolen. It wasn't just a number on a spreadsheet anymore. It was a tangible thing. A symbol of their theft. A future they were building on the ruins of mine. The weight of it all was crushing. The constant vigilance, the lies, the profound sense of betrayal. There were nights I would just sit in my car, unable to go into my own empty apartment because the silence was too loud. One night, it all became too much. I had just left a meeting where my father announced that after the contract was signed, Daniel would be promoted to president. I was to be rewarded by heading a new special projects division, a meaningless title for an office in the basement. It was the beginning of their final push to sideline me completely. I drove aimlessly for hours, overwhelmed by a grief so profound it felt like I was drowning. My hand shook as I pulled out my phone and scrolled past their names. My finger hovered over one name, Sarah. The need to hear a voice that wasn't laced with deceit was overwhelming. "Are you okay, Ethan?" she asked, after a few minutes of strained small talk. "You sound off." And in that moment, something in me broke. I didn't tell her everything. I couldn't, but I told her I was in trouble, that I was fighting for my company, for my work. "I feel like I'm drowning, Sarah," I confessed, my voice cracking. There was a long pause. "No, you're not," she said, her voice suddenly firm and clear. "I always knew you were a fighter, Ethan. You just used to fight for the wrong people. It sounds like you're finally fighting for yourself." Her words hit me harder than any of my family's insults. "You're finally fighting for yourself." She was right. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my life, my value. The moment of weakness passed, replaced by a cold, resolute calm. The next day, I walked into Olivia's office and played her the recording of Jessica. A grim smile touched her face. "That's it," she said. "We have everything we need." 2 weeks later, the news broke. Reynolds Construction had officially been awarded the I-87 bridge expansion contract. My phone lit up with texts. My father called, his voice slick with a triumph he hadn't earned. "We did it, son!" he boomed. "Get your best suit on. We're celebrating tonight at Oriole, top of the world." I looked at my own reflection in the dark screen of my phone. The man looking back at me was not the same one from a month ago. He was harder, colder, and ready. "I'll be there," I said. And so, we were back at the table at Oriole. The eye of the storm had passed. The hurricane was about to make landfall. The champagne had been flowing for over an hour, and the air was thick with their self-congratulation. I played my part, offering quiet toasts and forced smiles. I felt like a ghost at my own funeral. and they were the ones celebrating my demise. Then came the bill, the laughter, the condescending expectation that I, the family ATM, would cover the $28,000 celebration of my own execution. And then, the USB drive, the soft, definitive click it made on the table, my quiet refusal. I'm not paying. Silence fell like a guillotine. My father's smile froze, then curdled into a scowl. Don't be difficult, Ethan. This isn't the time for games. This isn't a game, I said, my voice quiet but cutting through the thick air like a razor. I looked around the table, meeting each of their panicked, confused eyes. This is a lawsuit. I tapped the USB drive again. And this is a copy of it, filed with the court this morning, along with a petition for an emergency injunction to freeze all company and personal assets. My mother's wine glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the pristine floor. The sound was unnaturally loud in the tomb-like silence of our table. Daniel's face, usually tanned and confident, was suddenly pale and clammy. "What are you talking about?" my father snarled, his voice a low growl. "What lawsuit?" "A lawsuit for forgery, for starters," I said, my gaze locked on his. "For the documents you had me sign 3 years ago, the ones that diluted my ownership from an equal partnership to a measly 20% under the guise of tax optimization." I turned to my mother. Her hand was at her throat. "A lawsuit for embezzlement," I continued, "for the millions of dollars you've been siphoning into offshore accounts through a shadow accounting system. Rebecca Chen was kind enough to provide a full accounting. She's a very meticulous accountant." She let out a small, strangled gasp. I looked at Daniel, whose triumphant smirk had been replaced with slack-jawed horror. "And a lawsuit for conspiracy to commit fraud. I know all about the plan to fire me after the contract was signed. I know about the critical design flaw you were going to plant in my bridge blueprints to destroy my reputation." I let a small, cold smile touch my lips. "I found it, by the way, and I corrected it last week. The plans submitted to the state are now flawless and secure." The color drained completely from Daniel's face. Thomas Green, my uncle, started to push his chair back, a look of pure panic in his eyes. "I wouldn't leave just yet, Thomas," I said, my voice dropping. "The lawsuit also names you as a co-conspirator. The FBI is going to be particularly interested in your role facilitating the kickback scheme with Senator Wilson." The 2 board members stared, their faces aghast. This was no longer a family squabble. This was a federal crime scene. "You see, this USB drive is just a copy," I said, letting the words hang in the air. "A courtesy. The original evidence is with my lawyer. Another copy is in a bank vault. And a full, detailed package outlining every fraudulent transfer, every illegal kickback, and every forged document has already been delivered to the SEC and the FBI." I stood up, straightening my jacket, feeling completely in control for the first time in my life. "The problem for you isn't if you're going to be investigated," I said calmly. "The problem is deciding which one of you is going to get arrested first." My father finally found his voice. It was a harsh, ragged whisper, stripped of all its bravado. "You would do this? You would destroy your own family?" I looked at the man who was once my hero. "You stopped being my family the moment you decided I was disposable," I said, the words coming from a place of deep, settled clarity. "Family doesn't plot to ruin one of their own. Family doesn't steal from their own son. You did this. All of it." I turned and walked away from the table, leaving them in the wreckage of their own making. As I reached the door, Jessica's desperate voice called out, "Ethan, please, we can explain!" I paused, but I didn't turn around. "The explanations," I said, loud enough for the whole room to hear, "are for the federal prosecutors now." The moment I stepped out of Oriel, the city air felt different. It was cleaner, lighter. It was the first breath I had taken in months that wasn't heavy with the weight of secrets and lies. The cacophony from the restaurant I'd just left, the shouting, the crying, the frantic phone calls, was already a distant, muffled sound, like a storm I had finally walked out of. A Blacktown car was waiting at the curb. Olivia Parker sat in the back, the glow of her phone illuminating her sharp, focused features. She opened the door for me. "How did it go?" she asked as I slid in beside her. The fuse is lit, I said, leaning my head back against the cool leather. I felt an exhaustion so deep it felt like it was in my bones, but it was a good kind of tired, the kind that comes after a long, hard-won fight. Good, she said, her focus already back on her phone. The motion to freeze their assets was granted an hour ago. They're locked out. From everything. Company accounts, personal accounts, the offshore funds. By the time their lawyers figure out what's happening, it will be too late to move a single dime. I closed my eyes, letting the reality of it wash over me. It was over. The power they held over me, the complex financial web they had used to control and manipulate me my entire adult life, was gone. What happens now? I asked, my voice quiet. Now, Olivia said, we let the justice system do its work. The SEC will launch a formal investigation into the financial fraud. The FBI will handle the public corruption angle with Senator Wilson. And our civil suit will proceed to claw back every penny they stole and restore your rightful ownership of the company. She looked at me, a rare hint of a smile on her face. You did good, Ethan. You stood your ground. As we drove through the sleeping city, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Rebecca. It's happening. Margaret is locked out of the financial system. She's been calling me non-stop, alternating between threats and tears. All secure on my end. A wave of gratitude washed over me. In a world of betrayal, one person's loyalty had been a lifeline. We drove past my old office building, the headquarters of Reynolds Construction. The lights were on in my father's top-floor office. I could just imagine the scene up there. The panic, the bitter accusations, the frantic shredding of documents that were already copied and safely in the hands of the authorities. The empire my father had built on a rotten foundation was collapsing in on itself. The next few days were a blur. I gave my formal statement to two stone-faced FBI agents, walking them through the emails, the recordings, the entire ugly timeline. It felt surreal, laying bare my family's darkest secrets under the flat, fluorescent lights of a government office. But it also felt liberating. The truth was finally out. The news broke a week later, first as a local scandal, then exploding onto the national stage. Local construction firm, Senator, embroiled in kickback scheme. There were pictures of my father and Daniel, their faces grim and haggard, as they were swarmed by reporters leaving a courthouse. My name was kept out of it. Olivia had masterfully framed me as a whistleblower cooperating with the investigation. My family tried to contact me, of course. Dozens of calls and texts. Pleading messages from my mother about tearing the family apart. Rage-filled tirades from Daniel. And finally, a single, rambling voicemail from my father. A pathetic mix of anger, self-pity, and emotional blackmail. I didn't listen to any of them. Olivia handled all communication. There was nothing left to say. They had made their choices long ago. The company was in chaos, but it was a controlled chaos. With their assets frozen, the court appointed a receiver to oversee operations, working closely with me and Olivia. My first act was to call a company-wide meeting. I stood before the employees, the men and women I had worked alongside for over a decade, and I told them the truth that there had been a betrayal of trust at the highest level, and that we were going to rebuild. This time, with total integrity, I promised them their jobs were safe. Looking out at their faces, seeing fear replaced by a glimmer of hope, I knew this was what I was fighting for. I thought the dinner at Oriel was the final battle. I was wrong. That was just the end of the first war. The second war for the soul of the company and for my own sanity was just beginning. My father and Daniel, masters of manipulation, were not going to go down quietly. After posting bail, using funds from some hidden source that even Victor hadn't managed to uncover, they launched their counteroffensive. It wasn't fought in a courtroom. It was fought with lies in the court of public opinion. It started with a single article on a sleazy news blog known for its sensationalism. The headline screamed, "Greedy Son's Hostile Takeover," the tragic story behind the Reynolds construction collapse. The article, citing anonymous family friends, painted a grotesque picture of me, as a bitter, incompetent engineer, deeply jealous of my charismatic younger brother's success. It claimed I had fabricated evidence and manipulated the legal system just to steal the company my sainted father had built. They even twisted my dedication into a flaw, describing me as an obsessive, unstable workaholic who couldn't handle the pressure. The lies were so audacious and specific that they had a disgusting veneer of credibility. I could feel my father's fingerprints all over it. At first, I ignored it. But then the story was picked up by more mainstream outlets, always framed as a he said, she said family drama. The narrative began to shift. I was no longer the whistleblower. I was just one side of a messy, ugly dispute. Then the real damage began. Suppliers we had worked with for years suddenly started demanding payment up front. Our primary bank, citing the ongoing legal uncertainty and negative press, put a hold on our line of credit. They were trying to bleed us dry, to make the company worthless before the civil suit was ever settled. The next attack was far more personal. One evening, Rebecca called me, her voice trembling. "Ethan, they came to my apartment," she whispered. "Your brother Daniel and another man. They hadn't threatened her, not directly, but they offered her money. A lot of money. $100,000 in cash," she said. "A severance package, they called it. All I had to do was sign an affidavit saying you pressured me to falsify documents." My blood ran cold. "What did you do, Rebecca?" "I told them to get out before I called the police," she said, her voice gaining strength. "I slammed the door in his face. But Ethan, I'm scared. They know where I live." We got her into a secure corporate apartment that night and filed a report for witness tampering. But the incident shook me to my core. They weren't just fighting for money anymore. They were fighting like cornered animals, willing to do anything to survive. Then came the most insidious attack of all, from my mother. She was under house arrest at the mansion, awaiting her trial. One afternoon, I received a call from her lawyer. My mother had suffered a serious health event and was asking to see me. "It's a lie," I told Olivia. "Almost certainly," she agreed. "A classic manipulation tactic. But if you refuse to go, they'll use it against you." So I went. The mansion I grew up in felt cold and alien. A private nurse let me in. My mother was in her bedroom, propped up on a mountain of pillows, looking pale and frail. An IV stand was next to her bed. It was a convincing performance. "Ethan," she whispered, reaching a trembling hand out to me. "I want this to end. Your father. This is destroying him. We made mistakes, I know we did, but you're our son. Please, Ethan, drop the charges. For me. For the family." I looked at her, at the pale makeup, the weak voice, the perfectly timed tears, and I felt nothing. The part of me that would have once been crippled by her guilt was gone, burned away by the truth. "The time for that is over," I said, my voice flat. "You had years to be a family. You chose not to be. These are the consequences." I glanced at the forestand. "And tell your nurse that saline solution won't convince a judge you're at death's door." It's pathetic. Her face changed in an instant. The frail, sick woman vanished, replaced by the cold, calculating woman I now knew her to be. The tears stopped. Her eyes narrowed. "You ungrateful child," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "After everything we gave you. You built it for yourselves," I shot back. "You built it with my work and with stolen money. You have no one to blame but yourselves." I walked out without looking back. That was the final emotional tie. Severed for good. The climax of their smear campaign came at a special session of the City Council, which had been called to review our affordable housing contract. The project was the symbol of our new beginning, and they were determined to kill it. My father, looking dignified and persecuted, in a perfectly tailored suit, was allowed to speak. He gave the performance of a lifetime, portraying himself as a heartbroken father betrayed by a vengeful, unstable son. He spoke of my supposed instability and my jealousy, and he hinted that the entire company was at risk under my erratic leadership, and it was working. I could see the doubt creeping onto the faces of the council members. They were politicians, after all. and they were terrified of bad press. Then, it was my turn. Olivia had told me to stick to the facts, to be professional. But as I stood at the podium, looking at my father's smug, deceitful face, I knew that wasn't going to be enough. I had to speak from the heart. I didn't talk about the embezzlement or the wire fraud. I talked about what it felt like to pour your soul into something, only to have it stolen. I talked about the importance of integrity, not just in business, but in life. And then I looked directly at the council president. The allegations against my character are part of a legal strategy designed to bankrupt the company I am trying to save, I said, my voice ringing with a conviction that came from deep within me. But this project isn't about me. It's about the hundreds of families who need a safe, affordable place to live. It's about the kind of city we want to be. Do we back down because of lies and intimidation? Or do we stand up for what's right and build something that will last? I presented them with our revised project plan, complete with enhanced transparency protocols and a new community oversight committee. I showed them our financials, proving that the company was stable despite the relentless attacks. And then, a surprise witness that Olivia had arranged came forward. It was the CEO of our primary bank. He testified that after their own internal review, prompted by the smear campaign, they had found no evidence of instability. In fact, he said, under my temporary leadership, the company's books were more transparent and reliable than they had ever been. Then he delivered the fatal blow to my father's narrative. He announced that the bank was fully restoring our line of credit, effective immediately. It was over. My father's face went ashen. The council voted unanimously to move forward with the project. As I left the council chambers, I passed my father in the hallway. The look in his eyes was no longer arrogant or manipulative. It was the hollow, empty look of a man who had played his last card and lost everything. The war was finally over. The trials were almost an anticlimax. After the very public failure of their smear campaign, there was nowhere left for them to hide. The mountain of evidence Olivia and I had compiled was insurmountable. The verdicts came in one by one, like the final nails in a coffin. My father and Daniel received long prison sentences. My mother, for her cooperation, got 2 years of house arrest, confined to a mansion that must now feel more like a gilded cage. Thomas Green, my former mentor, was also found guilty. The empire of lies they had built was officially condemned. Life settled into a new, quiet rhythm. The company, which I renamed Reynolds Integrity Construction, began to thrive. We became known not just for doing good work, but for being good people. The affordable housing project broke ground, and every time I visited the site and saw the walls going up, I felt a sense of purpose that was more valuable than any dollar amount they had ever stolen. I promoted Rebecca to CFO. Her integrity had earned it. One day, about 6 months after the trials ended, I received a letter. It was from my mother. It wasn't manipulative or pleading, just a few short sentences. I have been thinking a lot about the choices I made, she wrote. I know it is too late for forgiveness, and I do not ask for it. I only hope that one day you find peace. I read the letter, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of something other than anger or pity. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a kind of closure. She had, in her own limited way, finally acknowledged the truth. My own peace, I realized, didn't come from her letter or from the court verdicts. It came from the work. It came from seeing the pride in Rebecca's eyes when we announced a new profit-sharing plan for all employees. It came from a quiet coffee with Sarah, who had become a trusted friend again, where we talked about the future instead of the past. For years, my biggest fear was losing my family's approval. I thought their validation was the measure of my worth. The final, desperate war they waged against me, the one designed to break me, did the opposite. It forced me to define myself, not by who I was related to, but by what I stood for. My worth was never something they could give or take away. It was inside me all along. Their greatest mistake wasn't just underestimating my intelligence. It was underestimating my resilience. They thought my integrity was a weakness. It turned out to be my foundation. And on that foundation, I'm building a life of purpose, of honesty, and of peace. A life that is finally my own. This story has been heavy on my heart, and sharing it feels like another step in that rebuilding process. It makes me wonder about all of you listening right now. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to fight for what you knew was right, even if it meant standing completely alone against the people you were supposed to trust the most? Where do we draw the line between family loyalty and our own integrity? Is there a point where "but we're family" is no longer a valid excuse for toxic, destructive behavior? I know what my answer is, but I'm curious about yours. Could you ever truly forgive a betrayal of this magnitude? Or is walking away the only real path to peace? Sometimes, the quietest goodbyes are the ones that set you free. If this story made you feel understood, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to Cocotable Reddit. Every follow and comment gives me the motivation to keep sharing these real, emotional stories with you. And if you have a story of your own, feel free to share it in the comments. I'm always here to listen. Now, let's talk about it in the comments.